All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating and honestly most confusing books in the entire Bible, Revelation. It's just packed with these incredible images and prophecies that have puzzled people for centuries. But what does it all actually mean?
I mean, you've heard the terms thrown around, right? A 7-year tribulation, a special army of 144,000 virgins. But where do those ideas even come from? And more importantly, what does the text itself have to say? We're going to dig into the source material and see what's actually there.
Okay, so first up on our list is one of the most famous groups in the whole book, the 144,000. They show up in Revelation chapter 7, so who in the world are they? Is that a literal number? Let's break it down. So here's the thing. According to our source, the absolute key to unlocking this is to see that this whole idea is planted firmly in the Old Testament. A census, the 12 tribes of Israel, this wasn't some strange new concept. If you were a Jewish reader back then, this would have clicked instantly. So, the most straightforward reading is that this group is ethnic Jews who believe in Jesus.
Right. But here's where everybody gets kind of stuck. In chapter 14, it says they have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. Now that sounds weird, especially since the Old Testament really values marriage. So, what gives? What's really going on with that description?
Okay, so our source lays this out in 3 really simple steps. Step 1, their identity. They're Jewish believers in Jesus. Step 2, the context. This idea of being sealed for protection, that's pulled straight from the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament. And step 3, their purity, is almost certainly about spiritual faithfulness, not their physical relationship status.
And this is the absolute game changer right here. See, all throughout the Old Testament, the #1 metaphor for worshiping other gods, for idolatry, was spiritual adultery. Being unfaithful to God was talked about like cheating on a spouse. So when Revelation says this group is undefiled, it's using that exact same powerful metaphor. It's saying they stayed 100% loyal to God and didn't chase after idols.
All right, so we've talked about the people. Now let's switch gears and talk about the timeline. We're going to do a little fact check on one of the most famous ideas to come out of Revelation studies, the Great Tribulation.
Admitted, when someone says the Great Tribulation, what pops into your head? For most of us, it's this very specific idea, right? A 7-year clock of just awful suffering and persecution that happens right before the end of everything. It's a hugely popular idea.
And this is where things get really interesting. On the one hand, you have the popular view that pieces together this 7-year timeline from an interpretation of Daniel chapter 9. But on the other hand, scholars point out that the actual phrase Jesus uses, a time of trouble such as never has been, is a direct quote from Daniel chapter 12. And that chapter talks about terrible suffering, but it never ever attaches a specific number of years to it.
And this quote from Dr. Michael Heiser really just hits the nail on the head. He says, "I'm not saying there's no such thing as a 7-year tribulation, but I can say there's no Bible verse that says it because there isn't." That's the core of it. The 7-year tribulation is a conclusion, an interpretation. It's not a direct quote from anywhere in the Bible. Okay, so if we push aside the interpretations for a second, what does the Bible actually say? Well, it says there will be a time of trouble unlike anything the world has ever seen. It does not give it a specific length. We know it comes before the end, the final judgment, and we know it involves severe persecution of God's people. If we stick to that, we're sticking to what the text itself says. You know, all of this really leads to a way bigger question. How are we even supposed to read a book like this? I mean, Revelation is just dripping with symbols and bizarre, powerful imagery. What's the right mindset to even approach it with?
I mean, just try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. We have a hard time with this book 2,000 years later, with all our commentaries and resources. Imagine being one of the first people in those 7 churches to get this letter. How would you even begin to process images of a beast rising from the sea or cosmic battles in the heavens? Were you just supposed to be confused?
So, a huge roadblock for us modern readers, our source argues, is that we keep trying to force our physical, geographical rules onto the spiritual world. People literally try to draw maps of the afterlife with a little box for Sheol, the realm of the dead, and another box for paradise right next door, as if you could just walk between them.
And that's really the core idea you got to wrap your head around. The spiritual world is a whole different kind of reality. It's a placeless place. It doesn't have GPS coordinates. It just doesn't play by our physical rules.
So you might be asking, well, why use all this physical language then? Dr. Heiser puts it perfectly. We're trapped by the limitations of our vocabulary. The people who wrote the Bible were, well, people. They had to use the words they had, words for mountains and seas and animals, to try and describe a non-physical reality. They were trying to describe the indescribable.
But here's the thing that's so easy for us to forget. This style of writing wasn't totally out of the blue for the original audience. Anyone who was literate back then would have known about apocalyptic writing. They grew up on the Old Testament prophets, like Daniel and Ezekiel, which are full of this kind of stuff. They had the mental toolkit to handle it.
Okay, so where does that leave us? What are we supposed to do with all this information? Well, the goal here is not to just hand you a new secret decoder ring or a different prophecy chart. The goal is to give you a new tool for reading the book yourself.
See, the point isn't to just trade one secret code for another. The whole approach of trying to crack Revelation like it's a puzzle with a single neat solution is maybe not the best way to go about it.
No, the real takeaway here, the crucial tool, is this. The master key to understanding Revelation is the Old Testament. The book is just soaked in Old Testament language, imagery, and ideas. If we want to read it like the first audience did, we have to read it with their library in our heads.
All right, so let's just do a quick rundown of the big takeaways. First, the 144,000 are almost certainly Jewish followers of Jesus, whose purity is a metaphor for being faithful to God. Second, the Great Tribulation is a real biblical event, but the specific 7-year part is an interpretation. Third, this wild apocalyptic language is just our human attempt to talk about a spiritual reality. And finally, and most importantly, the Old Testament is the key that unlocks it all.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If thinking this way can help make sense of a book as wild as Revelation, what else could we understand? What kind of amazing new things could we discover if we tried to read the entire Bible, not just through our own modern eyes, but through the eyes of the people who first wrote it and read it? Now that's a thought that could change everything.